Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm here with another guest star. It seems that like every day I got a new guest for the podcast. And I promise you, Marshall and Jackson have not disappeared, but you know, these topics keep flying in faster than we can keep up with, it seems like. So I'm sending the DMs and we're working towards making more content for everyone. But joining me is Brandon Owens of Around the ASUN podcast, the Around the ASUN podcast. And I'm not sure what the other one is. I know yeah, I know it's a Jacksonville State one and with Gamecocks in the name. So I mean, if you can just elaborate on everything and just pick up on anything I missed, Brandon.
Yeah, so I started the Cocky Nation podcast a few years ago with a few of my buddies in the band here, and we mainly started it because there was not a, I guess you could say, official podcast for JSU sports, and so we cover JSU sports, and uh, we were all three in the band, and so we covered the band a little bit, but nothing like too major because we are a sports podcast, so.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, not that bands aren't interesting, but I mean, most people do come for the sports for sure. I guess this is a good week to have you on because everyone knows about Jacksonville State. They're a hot name in the college football world. I gotta ask, honestly, were you surprised by the result, or did you know all along that Jacksonville State was gonna come into Tallahassee and top Florida State?
Oh, absolutely not. I thought we were going to get boat raced like we did against UAB. I was watching the entire game and we got to the score of 17-14. And I was like, okay, if we win, great. If we don't, I'm happy to lose by 3 because an FCS program is not supposed to beat Florida State. So I was going to be happy either way. I was not expecting that pass from Zarek Cooper to Phil Johnson. Uh, to have the go-ahead score. I'm pretty sure I woke up all of my dorm and probably half of Jacksonville with how loud I was yelling and everything, but I was very ecstatic, but no, I was not expecting that.
I mean, at least you're honest. I mean, I guess I would have hammed it up and said, yeah, I expected us to come in and pull the upset, but no, it's definitely a great win. And you mentioned the UAB game. It just shows how funny college football is as a sport. Get blown out by UAB, like not even on the road, like at a neutral site, and then beat Florida State, who almost beat Notre Dame and everything. It's just great. It's why we love college football. It's spontaneous. Kind of a macrocosm of life, honestly. But before we get too deep, going to our main topic this week, arguably a bigger game for regional on a regional aspect, on a regional aspect against North Alabama, a future conference mate. And I know that they're not part of the AQ7 or the WAC ASUN Challenge, choose your name of the 1-year conference, whichever one sounds cooler. But they will be conference mates starting next year in the ASUN. And I want to know your thoughts on this rivalry because if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure if Jacksonville State had much of a, I guess, geographic rival and a competitive rival in the Ohio Valley Conference.
We did not. And I would say that our closest one was probably Austin P, maybe UT Martin. But again, those weren't very big. This rivalry, I am so happy we have it back. It's an old rivalry. My parents went to Jack State, so there was a huge rival when they were both in the Gulf South Conference in the D2 days. It always had playoff implications, conference title implications, and towards the end of JSU's time in Division II and in the Gulf South Conference, it had national title implications. I believe they met like twice while my parents were here in the playoffs, and so it had a huge it was a big decider on who would most likely end up going to the national championship.
That's great. I mean, some might even venture to call it, I guess, Auburn, Alabama light, maybe, or the light Iron Bowl, if you will. And it's something I guess not many people know of. It's something that I stumbled upon just looking at this game because going against my next point, the ASUN is a very hodgepodge mix of schools at the moment. Not much in common geographically. You got Central Arkansas, then you got Eastern Kentucky, you have your 2 Alabama schools, and then you have Kennesaw State. And there's very limited ties to history right there. I think, do you think that's something that hurts the conference on a whole?
Um, yes and no. More no than yes, though. If you remember the past few years, in starting in 2017, it was 2017, then 2018. JSU played Kennesaw State in the playoffs in 2017, and then they had that 5 overtime game at SunTrust Park in 2018. So there's some history there, not much, but there's some history with those two schools. Like I said, JSU UNA, big old rivalry, and I'm excited to have it back. JSU and EKU were in the OVC together for 18 years. And then Central Arkansas, Jack State, nothing there. But Central Arkansas has some history with UNA because Central Arkansas used to be in the Gulf South Conference with UNA. And again, that was another rivalry that had like playoff implications.
I was unaware of Central Arkansas and UNA being in the same conference because of course I know about them being in the Southland. I would not have thought they were in the footprint of the Gulf South Conference, which I guess as we learned with all these conference names, these are really much like broad categories rather than more like specific groupings. But I mean that's interesting that these schools have history, I guess. But in terms of I guess a fierce like in-state rivalry, do you think that makes North Alabama, Jacksonville State the most, I guess, important rivalry or the best rivalry in the conference? Or like you said, Jacksonville State and EKU have that conference history as well on the Division I level. So I guess what are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely one of the most important rivalries in the conference. I guess like you said, it could be viewed as like the Iron Bowl light of the conference. It just has so much history. But I do believe that the most important, like the biggest rivalry, because I wouldn't consider this rivalry the biggest rivalry. The biggest rivalry of the ASUN is probably going to be Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State. And then this will be a big rivalry, but it'll probably be the most important as far as like knowing who the ASUN conference is, as far as like in the state of Alabama, in the Southeast, nationally. Because if you look at when UNA made the transition to D1, they are progressively getting better each year, and this is their last year of ineligibility for the playoffs. So all of those playoff implications with this rivalry, all of those conference implications for this rivalry will come back starting next year.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell with North Alabama, especially with the spread with the shortened fall season that they had only 4 games. But for the most part, they were competitive in all of them except for the BYU game. I mean, it's hard to really judge a team coming into this year, especially when they played like a hodgepodge schedule as an independent. You had teams like Stephen F. Austin playing like Angelo State and stuff like that. And it was just wild. It was a wild time last year for FCS schools that played only in the fall. But I mean, I do remember that North Alabama almost upset Southern Miss. They're really competitive in that game. Malik Willis was injured for their game against Liberty, but even then, that's a Division I team with loads and loads of money, and a solid transfer quarterback that started that game, Chris Ferguson. So, I mean, yeah, I'm excited to see what happens with UNA in the ASUN as well. And then again, like you said with the Kennesaw State, I don't think people realize, I guess, how great and loaded Kennesaw State is, and I think it's because they're an option team, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a fan of the service academies, the triple option always gets disrespected, but I think I'd have to agree that Jacksonville State, Kennesaw State will be that like kind of clash of the Titans, and I'm a sucker for ballpark football, so if they have it again at Truist Park, man, that'll be a spectacle, for sure. I guess on the note of neutral site games, I think Birmingham seems like a very logical place to have this game, and I'm a fan of the history of college football, so I'm going to say Legion Field is like the first side of that, and then again, it may be too big of a venue, but so I guess Protective Stadium also would be in the mix. But do you think it would be important for, I guess, the ASUN to have a neutral site kind of showcase game, like a showcase rivalry game? I know that in the conference's plans that they released in the spring, they talked about having like a sort of neutral site showcase game late in the year. They didn't really specify what city it would be in, but the idea was a very novel one, I thought.
Yeah, so that showcase, if for those of you that don't know, the ASUN is headquartered in Atlanta. So that was the city that was stated that this showcase was going to happen. Um, as far as like the UNA JSU rivalry, maybe not every year in Birmingham, but every once in a while, possibly having it in Birmingham. But I will go ahead and say if the games at JSU are packed out and the games at UNA are packed out for several years to where people want to come, but they can't come because it's like, even with standing room, it's just there's no room. Then maybe possibly looking at Legion Field. I mean, you may not fill up the stadium, but I mean, you'd be able to have more people come to that game. And I think with this rivalry getting restarted and about to be a huge conference rivalry, I think you'll see the attendance, especially at JSU, since we have the bigger stadium, you'll see the attendance for that game go way up.
And I think it's huge. Like we keep harping on the point of like it being an important game with playoff implications. With at the moment, I think the ASUN only has 5 members.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's like that's 4 conference games. Like literally, it's a 1 game season. It's almost like an elimination game with every conference game. There's not much room for error, there. So huge implications with the small size of the conference. I think Atlanta is. It's interesting that I guess the ASUN's headquartered in Atlanta. I feel like that's like a crowded place in the college football scene. I mean, it makes sense with Kennesaw State, but it just seems very crowded. So I'm not sure how much I guess leverage or success they can get out of the local fan base there.
Yeah, it can get a little hard, but they've been really successful in the past. Like the past few years, they've been really successful in having their headquarters in Atlanta, especially having the teams that they invite into the conference with them going to postseason, getting wins. Like they've been really successful. So I think Atlanta is a very good spot for them, especially when you look at the like a footprint map of the conference, because there are some teams that don't play in the ASUN football league. They either don't have football teams or they play in the Pioneer League, which is a non-scholarship FCS conference. Um, but when you look at the overall footprint of like full ASUN members, Atlanta is the dead center. So
Yeah, I mean, they call it the college football capital, or I guess people from Atlanta call it the college football capital for a reason. Um, I guess closing out the whole neutral site topic, earlier was it, I guess this year the Montgomery kickoff with Jacksonville State and the FCS kickoff in prior years being with Jacksonville State sort of hosting it, or being that surrogate home team. Would you be open to having, I guess, Jacksonville State, North Alabama be like an opening game, or would you want it like late in the season, opening neutral site game, like say it being like the FCS kickoff game, or would you prefer it be like to be a late season game with conference championships, at large FCS bids on the line?
I wouldn't mind it every once in a while being hosted at somewhere like the Crampton Bowl. That would be really fun. Other than that, I think it's going to be. I think the ASUN is about to set up the conference schedule, kind of like how Alabama has their conference schedule for us. I think it'll be a game against UNA and then another conference game against another opponent, and then KSU will be the last one. So UNA will be one of the last 3 conference games that we play. Even when we start adding more members into the conference, I think it'll be UNA, another conference opponent, and then KSU.
I think that's a good outline. I mean, like you said, like Kennesaw State is currently the Titan of the Big South. They'll be the power. They'll likely be one of the 2 powers of the ASUN once they join or once they make the leap. So should be exciting to see. You mentioned adding members, and of course, realignment's a hot topic on everyone's mind, at least on the FBS level. But I know the ASUN's been eyeing members for a long time. So who's on the top of your list for ASUN expansion? Because it's gonna happen. They're only at 5 members. I just want to know who's on the top of your list.
Well, it was James Madison, but there was just a Twitter post about them possibly going to the Sun Belt. So that's out. As of right now, my top 3 schools that I would want to join are Austin P, Missouri State, and Southern Illinois. As far as like the Missouri Valley schools that I just mentioned, I can see them moving, but why would they move when they're in one of the tougher conferences? Unless the ASUN has something to offer. But those are the three schools that I would like to see.
I mean, I think that's a solid list. I wouldn't have thought of the Missouri Valley Conference schools being on that list because again, it's the SEC of the FCS, and basketball too. It's got a strong basketball pedigree. In most years, it's a two bid conference. So I guess why wouldn't those schools leave that? So you mentioned James Madison, and something I want to like ask is, do you find members? Do you see the possibility that members would become dissatisfied with the television situation at at the CAA and jump to the ASUN because it's a running joke among I guess a lot of FCS tweeters about Flow Sports, and the still loading joke, it's overplayed, like, oh, Flow Sports is still loading, but it's just not a great platform. So do you see like the ASUN approaching maybe an Elon, maybe like a William and Mary to improve their academic profile, or like schools in that southern half of the CAA?
The problem with that is the ASUN doesn't want to go after private schools. So if anybody from the CAA were to come, I would see Richmond coming. They're the only private school in the southeastern United States, or southern United States. I'll get it right in a minute. Southern United States that is a public school that I know of, that I can think of off the top of my head from the Colonial. But they're a good addition too. I wouldn't mind Richmond joining as well. That would be great competition for our conference. And the ASUN is wanting to build they're wanting to build this conference to be a lot like the Big Sky, Missouri Valley, Colonial. They're wanting to be one of the more premier FCS conferences. So adding somebody like Richmond, even though some people would say they're not the best, go ahead and invite them. Like they when you look at the teams that are already in the ASUN, they would compete very well with us.
I'd have to agree, and I mean, we'll only see with a matter of time whether I guess the television deal with the CAA like causes enough tension. I think it's interesting that they don't want to approach private schools, and I get that that causes a divide most times between members. But is there any reason why beyond that the ASUN would not approach private schools?
So the other members that aren't in the football league, most of them are private schools. So there's a good majority of teams that are full members, minus football, that are private schools. So I don't think they want to overload the conference with private schools and be basically a Southern Conference 2.0. So that's the only thing I can think of.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because yeah, for every football playing school, there's like the Bellarmines, the Jacksonvilles, and whatnot. And it's like, and it's hard to keep track of. I'll be honest, a lot of like whether who's not playing football, who's playing football in the ASUN, or who's even in the Pioneer League too. When you have like Stetson in the league as well, it's kind of a hodgepodge and it's confusing. So it makes a lot of sense. I guess in terms of other candidates, do you see the ASUN? And I know the ASUN wants to go Division 1, so I'm not sure how these members would fit in with or not Division 1, FBS. I'm not sure how much these members would fit in with that future plan, but the MEAC currently at 6 teams, really one move away from dissolving football completely. Do you see them approaching a Norfolk State, South Carolina State, or like a North Carolina Central for the league?
No disrespect to the HBCUs, but I don't. I see them making the same move that NCA&T did, and if anything, if they make that move like NCA&T did to the Big South, you'll probably see NCA&T exit the Big South and probably go for the ASUN. So that, again, is just my opinion, my little theory of what might happen. Or you could see the MEAC completely go away from that and join the Southern Conference and make a huge HBCU super conference. So that's another thing that's been talked about as well.
I know Coach Sanders mentioned that as well, and you mentioned NCAA&T going to the ASUN instead of what's left of the MEAC. I know NCAA&T's kind of kicked the tires a little bit, like thought about what if they went FBS, and it's an interesting prospect because only one school's attempted to do that in Florida A&M, and they just the move was mistimed and totally unorganized, and they fell on their face. No disrespect there, but that's just what happened. So it'll be interesting to see for sure. I am totally 100% in on the plans of the WAC and the ASUN to bring up those conferences back to Division One. I mean, especially the WAC. My dad growing up in California, San Jose State fan. We grew up, loving the WAC, or I grew up loving the WAC because of him. And it would be great to see them back, and they're building momentum for sure. But again, an interesting time. Conference realignment is not just an FBS thing, always an FCS thing as well. And it might just heat up on that level too if James Madison ends up leaving for the Sun Belt, like I think they should.
Yeah, well, not only that, but with all of this FBS realignment, you're going to see it trickle down into the FCS, and some FCS teams be brought up to FBS. And then there's going to be a lot of movement at the FCS level if that happens.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see it for sure. I guess, is there anyone else you have in mind other than James Madison moving up to FBS in this wave of realignment?
North Dakota State.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's what I thought. That's what I thought you would have said, but I feel like that fan base is happy enough to win championships instead of winning like famous Idaho Potato Bowls in the Mountain West.
Yeah, if not them, then I'm going to get bashed by Bison fans for saying this, but South Dakota State. South Dakota State is another one that I think could easily make the jump.
Yeah. No, I agree, especially like what they did to Colorado State week one this year. And I mean, they're not winning championships. So maybe they'd rather win bowls because North Dakota State's in the way, of course. So I mean,
Maybe.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the Mountain West is looking to expand. And the only FBS candidate at the moment, FBS candidates at the moment are UTEP and New Mexico State, which are kind of slim pickings in terms of football, basketball, not so much. But yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see with those schools. An exciting time for sure.
I agree.
Yeah, well, I think that closes out all the topics we have. An exciting game this weekend. I think the UNA-Jacksonville State game is that at noon on ESPN Plus.
It's actually a night game, so it's
Oh,
at
it's a night game. Okay.
6. It's at 6 Central Time on ESPN Plus.
Oh, okay. No, that's a great time. I mean, a lot of competition, but still, ESPN Plus. Have it on one of your screens on your laptop while you watch. The night game. Totally a game to keep your eye on. A good early season FCS rivalry. Um, I'll tune in. I'll tune in a little bit for sure. Keeping tabs on it. Haven't really watched much Jacksonville State, or the only time I really watched UNA was during the pandemic season when they're like the one of the few games on first few weeks of the
Yeah.
season. But an exciting rivalry for sure before things heat up, before actually the actual rivalry, or before a lot of rivalries really take place later in the season. So definitely a game to tune in for sure. Brandon, do you have anything else to say? Thank you so much for coming on.
Just thank you for having me on. I'm glad to talk Jacksonville State football with anybody.
Oh yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that's how we all feel about our teams, man. I mean, I grew up near Worcester, huge Holy Cross fan, and anyone asked me to talk Holy Cross, I'd talk about them for days. I mean,
Well, on
every
that note, congrats on getting the upset win over UConn.
Oh yeah, no, that was great. I mean, if you told me as a kid back in as late as 2010 before I moved to New Mexico that and that was the year that UConn went to the Fiesta Bowl. If you told me that Holy Cross would beat UConn like in the next 12 years, I would have laughed. I would have laughed in your face. But it happened. Like the snowball rolled down the hill, and like we're at where we're at right now. And then Holy Cross beat UConn. Like I would not have imagined any of what happened in the college football landscape happening. But here we are. So it was great. But until next time, Brandon, we'll hopefully look to have you on for more ASUN talk, maybe during the playoffs. So when things spice up for this, great emerging conference. And again, thank you for coming on. And until next time, peace, love, and soul, everyone.